Hello, my name is Nicholas Abernathy. I'm going to be discussing the motion, this House as a straight A undergraduate student in philosophy would pursue a career in academia, i.e. PhD in philosophy, versus a career as a high school teacher, i.e. after degree program in education. But first, a little bit of background on me. I was born and raised in Nova Scotia. I went to undergrad at Queen's University in Ontario, and I'm currently doing a PhD in philosophy at Cornell down in the States. I researched the ethics of assisted dying. I was asked to give some debate accolades, so I'll run through them real quick. In high school, I was on the Team Canada Development Squad, and I won high school BP champs. In university, I've won the Harthouse InterVarsity, the McGill InterVarsity, as well as university BP champs, and I've made the semis of tournaments like Oxford, the North America University Debate Championship, Yale, etc. And I've broken at Worlds twice. As for what debate means to me, I'll go quickly here. I view my PhD as essentially one long prep session, and I write all of my term papers and my journal articles like a debater, as in one big PM speech or one big LO speech. More simply, debate has taught me all of the critical thinking skills that I need to excel in philosophy, and there's the social side, which certainly doesn't hurt. Okay, let's talk about the motion. I'll start with some non-side specific thoughts. The motion is about what you are pursuing rather than what you are getting. And so neither side should just assume without argument that their world is one where you get the job that you're going for. I'll talk a lot more about this, especially in relation to op. Second main observation is we know very, very little about this student. We know that they get straight A's and that they're in philosophy, but beyond that, we don't know their gender, we don't know the quality of the school that they're currently going to, we don't know their reasons for doing philosophy, we don't even know the country that they're in. And so in a debate like this, you should assert very little about this student and try to make arguments that apply in as many cases as possible. We'll see how effective I am in that regard. That'll be for you to judge. I'm not going to be giving like speeches, obviously, and I'm not going to be giving too many structural reasons. I'm just going to try to convey to you my general conception of both sides of this debate, some arguments, some areas for potential further pondering. Great. Let's start with Gov. I think Gov should start off by giving reasons for why the pursuit that happens in Gov's world is going to be effective. They should say that, look, being a straight A student is really, really good for your likelihood of getting into a PhD and being successful once you're in that PhD, especially if it's on the topic that you've done a ton of work in your undergrad on. I also think Gov, more importantly, should say, either with likelihood analysis or modeling, that you're very likely to consult with experts, namely philosophy profs, when you're determining which PhD programs you're applying to. So you're going to apply strategically. You're going to apply to a good range that for which you're probably going to get into at least one of the places you apply to. If you're not a very competitive applicant, you're not only going to apply to Oxford, Cambridge, etc. I also think that you should say that this will be the same when you eventually apply for jobs. So if after your PhD, you're not a super competitive applicant, you're probably going to prioritize applying to sort of lower level universities, community colleges, places like that. If after your PhD, it turns out you're an extraordinary applicant, then maybe you'll prioritize better universities. All that's relatively straightforward. I think Gov should have a little bit on why there are enough philosophy jobs available to go around in such that there will be people hiring even once you're done your PhD. I think basic reasons here include that, look, many undergraduate students want to take philosophy courses, and this means that many universities want to hire philosophy profs. The reasons why undergrads want this is oftentimes because they want to go to law school afterwards, and philosophy is great for setting you up for that. It's also just the case that philosophy teaches critical thinking skills, which are useful across a wide range of fields. It's also the case, again, another reason why lots of universities will want to hire philosophy profs is because in many different disciplines outside philosophy, they want to offer courses on the ethics of our discipline. So like the ethics of engineering or the ethics of AI, however you want to cash it out. And philosophers are really, really good for this. They can fill that gap. And so that's another reason why you'd hire philosophers because of these kinds of courses. Great. Let's now talk first about why doing a PhD in philosophy is awesome, and then why having a philosophy job is awesome. And then we'll later dunk on opposition's world. In terms of why doing a PhD in philosophy is awesome, I think there's some very basic reasons here. First is money. Most PhD programs pay you, and they pay you a pretty good amount in the form of a stipend. Obviously, you have to earn it because you are a teaching assistant for them during your PhD, or you're a research assistant in some cases. By contrast, in ops world, you have to pay for the after degree program in education qualification. And so there's a big money asymmetry there. It's also the case that when you're doing a philosophy PhD, you are just intensively researching philosophy. And you're not only that, but you're researching the topic that you're most interested in philosophy, because you get to choose your thesis topic in philosophy. It's not assigned to you. And because this student has a revealed preference for enjoying doing philosophy, especially, and a lot of it, I think it's quite likely that they would find this intellectually satisfying. It's also just satisfying to make the kind of breakthroughs in a field that you get to make when you're doing a PhD, when you're going that deep. And it's nice to be an expert and feel like an expert and be acknowledged as an expert, all of which you will be on your specific niche within philosophy at the end of your PhD. Great. Let's talk a little bit about why having a job as a philosophy professor is awesome. There's some basic sort of social capital reasons for this. You're going to be respected for your intelligence, not just from having the PhD, but also from being a professor in a way that happens less when you're just a high school teacher. It's also the case that in most cases, you're going to get higher pay than you would as a high school teacher. This is like just empirically true. Profs make more than high school teachers, but you can do some structural reasons on why it is that when a job requires higher qualifications, like a philosophy prof job, it tends to have higher pay rather than a job that is accessible to a significantly larger number of people. It's also the case that in the ideal, you'll get tenure, which is to say, like, and again, I assume most of you will know what tenure is if you don't Google it, but I'll give the rundown is just tenure means that you basically can't be fired for almost any reason. You get significantly more freedom in terms of how you conduct yourself as a professor, and it also usually comes with significantly higher pay. And that's the ideal. But again, on Gov, you haven't proven for certain that you're going to get that. I also think, so with more certainty, you can just say that a philosophy prof gets to do philosophy all the time. And this is, again, extraordinarily intellectually satisfying in the same way that it's satisfying to do a PhD. You get to collaborate intellectually with other really smart philosophy professors and professors outside of philosophy, and you get to collaborate with really smart students and collaborating in a wide range of ways, office hours, lectures, co-authorship, however you want to cash it out. And contrast this with in ops world, even if you are teaching philosophy, and I'll discuss that later, you're oftentimes teaching it in a really oversimplified way to children who don't really get it. You oftentimes have to dumb things down so everyone can follow. It's just worse. It's less likely to be intellectually satisfying. And you don't get to do the kind of research dimension that you do as a philosophy prof, or at the very least, you don't get paid for it. Okay, let's talk a little bit about autonomy. So in contrast with the sort of standardized high school curricula that you'll have to conform to in ops world, on Gov, you get way more control. You get to write your syllabus, you get to choose the readings, and that's just for teaching. For research, you get even more control. You get to pick whatever the heck it is that you care about and work on that, and it's likely that you'll find that very enjoyable and fulfilling. Great. It's also, in some cases, you might be influential. Again, this might just be within your little corner of philosophy. You'll publish articles, change people's minds, etc. If you work on ethics especially, you might be influential in affecting policy, either done by government or by sort of private actors, corporations, however you want to work it out. Obviously, Ops should probably contest this. Ops should say that the average philosopher writes articles no one reads, and especially if they aren't in ethics. But I think Gov can still say there's a good chance of this. Great. Let's transition now to talking about why ops world is bad from the perspective of Gov. I think Gov should say that teaching high school is terrible. As I'm sure many of the viewers of this video will be aware, children can be awful to deal with. They are hormonal. Many of them are annoying. Many of them are disrespectful. A lot of your time as a high school teacher is spent managing interpersonal issues, not just between the children, but between you and the children. It's also like students oftentimes at high school don't even want to be there, and they don't care about the content. It's often a constant struggle to keep their attention, to keep them from talking to each other, to keep them from being on their phones in class. And again, let's be comparative here. These problems apply to some extent when you're teaching philosophy students at a university, but philosophy students at a university have chosen to take that class and they're paying to attend it. And so they are far less likely to have some of the problems that are endemic to teaching high school students. I also think you can push that, and again, the degree to which this is true in all countries is unclear, but you can push that public schools, which are most likely to teach at, are oftentimes really, really underfunded compared to universities. This is because like governmental austerity, at least in like Western liberal democracies, and there's issues with regards to universities. Like public schools obviously don't have rich donors in most cases, whereas universities often do, and high school students don't pay to attend public schools, whereas people pay to attend universities, so universities have money in that way. Obviously, these are all very simplistic mechanisms. I'm sure you could all do better, but it is true that there's probably a funding gap, and that changes how well you can do your job as a public school teacher. Will you even have the resources to be able to teach well? Will you have the books? Will you have the other sort of other equipment? unclear. Whereas at the university level, that's less of a problem. Okay, lastly, I think you should push on Gov that there's no guarantee on op that you'll even get to teach philosophy. Look, many schools, high schools, don't even offer it as a class. It's not a core course like math or science or English. And so you might have to teach something you don't even care about. It might be like gym or a generic social science that you don't have much experience with. That would suck, especially if you, again, have this revealed preference for doing philosophy, given that you've devoted your whole undergrad to it. Okay, those are my big picture thoughts on the Gov. I think it's relatively straightforward. Doing a PhD after undergrad is a very common pathway for a lot of high achieving undergraduate students. Let's talk op. I think the op is more interesting. And again, maybe my vision of the op will be tainted by the fact that I am currently doing and loving a PhD in philosophy. So you can take all of this with a grain of salt, but here's my vision of the op. I think op should concede that, okay, sure, the best case where you get a tenured job as a philosophy professor would be really nice. But Gov has not guaranteed that we're going to actually get that. And so what I would do on op is begin with a wide range of failure points where you might not succeed in getting the thing that you're pursuing in Gov's world. So the first possible failure point is getting into a PhD program. Oftentimes, universities will, for like philosophy PhD cohorts, will accept like 5 students out of 400 applicants. I know for me, it was a relatively similar ratio. And sure, you have straight A's, but the problem is all of the other people you're competing against, well, basically almost all of them, or a lot of them, will also have straight A's. And so that doesn't set you apart. And so oftentimes you're competing against people who are older than you, who have maybe done a master's, who have journal articles already, or at least one, who have conference presentations. Is that there's no guarantee you have any of that stuff. And also, the value of your straight A's is not guaranteed because universities, when they're assessing an applicant, care a lot about where they come from. If you got straight A's at like Princeton undergrad in philosophy, okay, you'll get into a good PhD program, probably. But if you got straight A's at a university that no one's ever heard of, that carries way less weight when it appears on your resume. And given that we have no clue what kind of undergrad you went to, we really don't know exactly how valuable your straight A's are in terms of getting into a PhD program. Next point of failure, are you even going to finish the program? Are you going to successfully get the PhD even if you get in? There's a lot of reasons why you might drop out. Note that PhD programs in philosophy can take 6 years or longer. There's tons of opportunity for burnout, anxiety, extraordinary like high difficulty levels. Again, because no PhD programs require different skill sets than undergrad philosophy. There's different skills required to make innovative breakthroughs in a field and do a book length project versus writing like 2,000 word term papers on fields that have already been well researched, where you're mostly just critically analyzing things other people have already said. And there's often just obviously way higher expectations for doing PhD level work, especially in philosophy. You also just might not enjoy doing any of this because this is different kind of labor. Again, another reason why your mental health might struggle and thus why you might have to drop out. It's also the case that you might have a horrible supervisor, and lots of people drop out because of having horrible supervisors who ask you to do things that you just don't want to do research-wise. Next point of failure, will you get a postdoc? I won't go into describing what a postdoc actually is, but long story short, it's basically like almost like another PhD, albeit only for like a two or 3 years. You do more research, and you oftentimes philosophy jobs expect you to have a postdoc before they hire you. And so this is another thing you have to apply for and fingers crossed get in order to set yourself up for getting the kinds of jobs that Gov is arguing for. The next thing, even if you get the postdoc, are you going to get a job at all? Like notoriously, the philosophy job market is terrible. Everyone in philosophy is aware of this. And this is true across the humanities, honestly. Universities are becoming more profit-oriented, and this is manifesting as massively underfunding the humanities. There's many different reasons for this, but one of them is just that humanities degrees are less immediately employable. If you have an engineering degree, you can directly become an engineer. If you have a business degree, you can directly become a business person. Whereas usually if you have a philosophy degree, for example, that doesn't get you as far because you then need to do something like law school or a philosophy PhD in order to translate that into making you a very desirable candidate. The implication of this is that students are willing to pay way more for degrees like engineering and thus for engineering courses. And this then means that the university will invest significantly more in hiring professors that teach those classes, which they can charge students more for, and way less for classes like philosophy. There's also differential levels of donor wealth when you have humanities versus like business school, which also does end up mattering, but I'm not going to go too far into that. You can also push on Gov that even if you get a job, it might be an adjunct job where you don't get paid a salary, but just get paid per class, where there's terrible stability, terrible pay, etc. Next failure point, are you going to get a tenure track job? This is what all philosophers want, but there's less and less of them these days. And yeah, it's very, very hard to get them. Again, once again, all we know about you is that you have straight A's. That's not at all a guarantee that you'll be qualified to do the things necessary to get a tenure track job. And lastly, even if you get a tenure track job, is there any guarantee you're going to get tenure? There's a publish or perish culture in academia, which includes philosophy. So you have to publish, publish, publish in the very best journals. This is extraordinarily stressful. And it's note also that whether you get published is oftentimes based, or almost always based, on the arbitrary whims of peer reviewers who might dislike your paper for whatever reason, even if it's good. And so you have to grind and grind and grind all through your PhD, maybe through the postdoc, then through adjunct positions, then through a tenure track, and then eventually maybe get tenure, that there's so many question marks there. So maybe Gov will say wonderful things about how good it is to have a full tenure track, a tenured philosophy job, but they haven't proven you'll get it. And that's what you say on op. Now, what you have to be comparative here, of course. Why are you way less likely to fail on ops world? Why are you going to get the thing that you're pursuing in ops world? This is just kind of empirically true, but I'll try to give some structural reasons. There's just tons and tons of teaching colleges, and they accept tons and tons of people, at least compared to philosophy PhD programs. And also, more importantly, like you're going to be a competitive applicant, a very competitive applicant for this path, because straight A's does set you apart from the class of people who are applying for teaching licenses. You're probably smarter than the average person at these schools, and so you're probably going to do just fine within them, and you're probably going to then set yourself up for getting a pretty good high school teaching job. Again, not quite as true, nowhere near as true for philosophy PhD. It's also just the case that the expectations for graduating from these places are significantly lower. And because these programs usually take 1 or 2 years rather than like 6 years or 7 years, there's way less possibility for burnout and cross-apply my earlier analysis. Also the case in terms of actually getting a job. There's just a labor shortage for high school teachers in most places on earth. The schools are desperate for teachers, and so you are not going to have anywhere near as much of a problem getting a job. People want to hire you, whereas in philosophy, there's significantly more people with PhDs than employers wanting to hire philosophy PhDs to teach for them. Now, Ops should be careful here. Ops should not get too far into the reasons for why there's this labor shortage, because once you get far into it, you realize that, oh, maybe it's because being a high school teacher actually kind of sucks. But if you hope that Gov doesn't find that out, and so you sort of rely mainly on the fact that there is this labor shortage and that you can easily then fill that gap, get a job. Lastly, there's this like a team could push back on you by saying, well, do you have the necessary social skills? Even if you have the necessary intelligence, I don't think this really matters between the two worlds, because to be a philosophy prof, you also need pretty good social skills and teaching skills and communication skills. And so the same thing applies to being a teacher. I don't think there's a large margin of change between the two sides there. Let's now talk impacts. Why is failure, which you've proven to be significantly more likely in Gov's world, bad? Lots of reasons. I encourage you all to come up with more. Wasted years is the first one. There's a big opportunity cost here. If you've spent 6 years or maybe also the postdoc afterwards trying to become a philosophy prof and you just can't do it, that's tons of time you could have spent like making more money at a high school teacher job or just like setting yourself up for success in a wide range of other ways. It's also just like this kind of failure would be soul crushing. You've sort of oriented your life for many years around this goal, and if then you fail, you will feel terrible about yourself. This has tons of downstream impacts for your life at large. It's also the case that it's unclear that if you fail at any point, especially during the PhD, what are you going to do for a job? Like you need to make money, and all you have now is your undergrad degree, and so you might be screwed, and that would be bad. We don't know how much money like your parents have, and we don't know how much money you have in savings, so it's unclear exactly how bad it would be for you to not have a job temporarily, but it could be very bad. It's also the case that it looks bad. It can look bad on your resume to say that, oh, for a few years I tried to get a PhD and failed. Employers or people who are maybe admitting you to like law school probably wouldn't like to see that, because they want to see evidence that you're a hard worker, that you'll commit to what you start, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that there's some interesting back half arguments that on Gov responding to this by saying, well, if you fail, you'll fail in such a way where you can still set yourself up to like go to law school. And I think this is probably true, but I'm not going to get into this because it makes the whole debate more complicated once we consider the fact that teams can defend pursuing this up to a point, namely like the point of failure, and that complicates everything. So just going to drop that. Right. There's two main ways to end the op case, to like put the feather on the bow. I butchered that expression. It's fine. I prefer the second, but I want to give both of them. So the first pathway to end the op case is to say just a bunch of reasons why being a high school teacher is awesome. I think you can say, just in terms of framing, that you'll probably teach philosophy. Again, a good number of places do, in fact, want philosophy teachers, especially in like the UK and Europe, maybe less so in America. But you can pivot and say maybe you'll teach world religion, or maybe you'll teach politics, and all of that's similar enough. Yeah, you'll be fine. Okay. But more importantly, in terms of why it's good, I think you can push on, shaping the next generation. High school students are in maybe the most formative years of their life. You can serve as a mentor to them. You can pick someone who most needs mentoring or who you most want to mentor. And some kids really, really need it, and it can be enormously fulfilling to serve this role. Now, let's be comparative here. Obviously, you can mentor students when you're a philosophy prof, but it's just easier as a high school teacher. You're in more of a position of authority over them. You spend significantly more time with your students. You have smaller classes as compared to like a 100-person intro to philosophy lecture. You'll know all the names, you'll learn more about them, again, all in ops world, and you'll have more opportunities to meet people after school. Maybe you'll coach their sports team, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's also next reason, like you get your summers off if you want, and if you can afford this. Whereas in Gov, you have to spend your summers grinding out research and course prepping to a more significant extent. And so if you care about having more vacation, vote up. Lastly, I think you can push that oftentimes teaching jobs are union jobs. And so this gets you pretty good job security. Sure, it's not quite as good as having tenure, but it's certainly arguably better than being an untenured prof at most universities. So explaining the benefits of union membership is a reasonable way of pushing back on some of the possible benefits of maybe getting tenure that Gov is going to push. Second path, again, I like this one more because I think it is more responsive to how little we know about the student. You say that actually, panel, you should vote only based on the likelihood of success or failure because it's basically impossible for us to infer from this motion which job the student is actually going to prefer doing. And the main reason for this is just it's so unbelievably person specific whether you'll prefer being a high school teacher versus being a philosophy prof. It depends on things like, do you like small classes or big classes? Do you like control or do you like certainty? Do you like working with children or do you prefer working with adults? What kind of a workplace do you want to be in? A million different questions. And I'm sure you can all come up with better reasons than the ones I've already given. But long story short, which job is better? It depends. And so you might say for that reason, because we don't know which job will be better, we should pursue the job that we can actually get with certainty and that we can get faster and we can get more with more stability and security attached to it. And I think that then means vote up. I also think you can push that there's sort of adaptive preferences and that people get used to jobs really quickly. And so it's actually not like in terms of a fulfillment or whatever, you'll probably be able to find that in both jobs. There's not going to be a large margin of change for happiness once you get the job. So again, more reasons to vote based on who actually secures the job rather than exactly how good the job actually is. Okay, so then I hope you see that the high level, my vision of this round comes down to Gov saying, sure, maybe we don't get this job, but it would be really awesome if we had it. And Op saying, okay, sure, maybe really, really awesome if you had that job, but there's no guarantee, and we think it's actually quite unlikely that you will get it. And that's the big picture tension that I think this motion nicely pulls out. And I hope I've given you reasons for why both sides can give reasons for why, even despite that trade-off, you should vote for them rather than the other side. I think this is a fun motion. I think it's a good motion. Again, I apologize for any bias infiltrating my takes on it. But I hope this has been somewhat useful, and I wish you all the best of luck at this tournament and at future tournaments. Cheers.